turn to your colleagues sitting around you, and I want you to remind each other what is the normal pH of urine and what are abnormal urine content as well, right? So kind of important for us to keep track and making sure that we're not heading into acidosis, right? Yeah.
I'm having a hard time understanding why it causes CNS depression.
A lot of it has to do with the excitability of the cells. So we don't have our autonomic system working as well because it needs a different charge in order to be instigating the breathing and the heart rate centers and everything like that.
So like if the blood is becoming acidotic, is it because there's too many like hydrogen ions and then that's messing up the charge?
One of our,
okay.
Yes, absolutely. Alkalosis, on the other hand, is when the pH is over 7.45. So that's when we're heading above our range. pH is too high, neurons are becoming really excited, and so there's numbness, tingling, muscle twitches. We're feeling all of those things firing all the time because everything is so excitable. Sound good? Okay, so we get this daily input and output, right? So where do we get acid from? Well, we can get it from our diet, we get it through amino acids and through fatty acids. We get them, they're produced when we go through metabolism of anaerobic metabolism. Abnormal fat and amino acid digestion will make it happen. Metabolism, if they're in a diabetic state like ketoacidosis. These are all ways that we can get it, but our largest would be CO2 production. Anytime we are metabolizing, it's creating CO2, and as we will remember and relearn in just a moment, that this all CO2 converts into hydrogen ions, right? So that's where the majority of it is coming from. Yes, it comes from these other areas, but mostly it's just CO2 production. Base input. You know, we really just don't get a whole lot of basic things into our body very much. Sometimes they can come in through diet, or if you like take a lot of Tums, right? But what this leaves us knowing is that we've got a lot of acid that we have to deal with and get rid of out of the body. So we have, mainly we're trying to balance our pH most of the time by trying to get rid of the acids and buffer them off within the body. Oh, I just remembered something. All right, here is another question for you. Give me 1 second, I need to grab something from the other room. All right, how about you? Oh, look at you, smart people. Nicely done. Most of us were there. All right? So we kind of just talked about it. Good short-term memory recall. All right, what's this? Ooh, the best equation ever. It's how we all survived. Okay, so this equation wants to push either direction continually throughout the body in many different places, right? So we start with carbon dioxide. We are producing carbon dioxide as a byproduct of metabolism all the time, right? So Krebs cycle, kicking off carbons, joining with O2, and we get carbon dioxide, right? Well, we have a whole heck of a lot of water within the system, right? So when this happens, it will instantaneously transform into what? You guys know what
Carbonic
this is?
acid.
Say again?
Carbonic acid.
Carbonic acid, nicely done. In which, and how, what chemical helps that happen?
Carbonic anhydrase.
Carbonic anhydrase, nice, right? But then it quickly, this is not stable within the body, right? This does not stay stable within the body, so immediately it's now going to divide into what? Bicarbonate and hydrogen ions, right? So it's going to push, whenever we have a large amount of CO2, it's going to push it this way to produce more hydrogen ions within the system. That's what we're mainly concerned with. Yes, it produces bicarbonate as well, but the hydrogen ions are what we have to deal with, right? then if we ever have a whole lot of hydrogen ions within the system, it can actually push this the other direction, right? So when we get back into the bloodstream, hydrogen ions attached to bicarbs that are there turns into carbonic acid. This is unstable within the body, becomes CO2 and water, and we can blow off CO2 from the lungs. All right, that's how that transitions back and forth. All right, so dealing with the acid load. Yeah, Mark.
Can you explain how the carbonic acidase transforms it, or what?
No.
Okay.
It's just a catalyst.
I can't go that detailed.
Is it just like an enzyme that
Yes.
helps it transform into it?
Yes.
Okay.
The particular molecular,
And
We
so
don't-
we don't need to know that. It's just that's the piece that helps it transform
yes,
to kick it off. Okay.
both ways.
Too smart for your advisor there.
Well, I just didn't quite understand it.
Yeah.
Just it said that name of it, but didn't say anything else with it.
Yeah. All right, on the front of your card, what I want you to do is I want you to
I need
this
one
is
more
part of
card.
your.
Never mind.
Oh, you got it? Okay. I can give you another one if you want. You can have 2 cards. All right, so what I want you to do is on the front of the 3x5 card, you can determine the front. I want you to write out the 3 primary systems that regulate against changes in blood pH. This should have been part of your homework, right? So it's just a fresh recall. Can you do it without looking at your notes? And give me like which one's what goes
Bless
quickly
you.
and which one takes longer to do. Can you do it? You feel good. With other people at your table, what did you guys come up with?
I got respiratory, renal, and then urine.
I had circulatory because that's where the chemicals were. That's what I had.
Okay. Yeah, that third one is the one that got me.
Yeah, and then my,
I got chemical, meaning like the bicarbonate stuff,
Yeah.
circulatory, respiratory, and renal.
and renal being the slowest.
But doesn't renal produce the bicarb? Okay.
No idea.
What'd you get? What'd you get?
When you say chemical system, are you talking about in the blood?
What'd you get?
Kind of like the green, the other side of the
I know, you bought it or something.
Okay. So the respiratory is our CO2, that's how we blow it off. Our renal, my understanding is the renal is what gives us the bicarb to switch it. And then the urine, like, that was my question.
you guys got 'em
that I
down?
didn't understand of how they change this different. The
Okay,
urine can, like,
short term.
push more out.
We're gonna buffer it off, right? Extracellular buffers, we've got bicarbonate, that's our biggest one, right? Phosphate also contributes. We have intracellular buffers like organic phosphates, proteins, right? We've got the buffer. All right, so that's our immediate short term, acts quickly. Next, we hit our midterm solution, which is our lungs. Let's just blow it off to be able to buffer it out, right? So we're dumping CO2 into the atmosphere. This really deals with about 75% of our buffer imbalances, or of our acidic imbalances to try and blow it off. Long-term solution, that's when it comes to the kidney, right? And we can excrete hydrogen ions, either as dihydrogen phosphate or ammonia. Sound good? Also, production and recycling of bicarbonate helps us to buffer it off within the kidneys by producing more bicarbonate. All right, flip your card over. Without looking at your notes, can you write out the equation?
Oh.
Short-term memory recall.
Yes.
You can do it.
Is that HCO3?
Yes, it is the one I
H2CO3?
just showed you. We are on short-term
That's the
memory
carbonic
recall.
and then the H.
I thought it was
CO3 negative bicarb.
Learn.
Oh, the bicarbonate equation.
Shannon's cheating.
I did not cheat.
Uh,
I don't remember this middle one. It's CO2 plus HCO.
I think it's H2CO3.
And rearranging H plus HCO.
Okay, because you gotta have, just combine them. You just add all of the molecules and that seems easier than,
Been memorizing it.
yeah.
I feel like it's crazy to like take out away and then it's back up again.
Carbonic.
That's a pretty quick turnaround.
What's that?
I get like her get so like I'm getting so tired at the end of this week, so I take like half of Friday and then it's just like back up. There's a lot of homework,
Yeah.
but I mean,
Keep your cards.
if I have a choice,
Yeah.
I try to take Sundays off.
Yeah.
All right, so it should look something like this,
I don't care about it.
right?
Just want to die.
CO2 plus water through carbonic anhydrase, we get carbonic acid, then goes to bicarbonate and hydrogen ions, and vice versa. So really you could draw either direction, right? So this is our chemical buffer system. What medication could impact this? I'm trying to be vague right now to see if anybody knows. You got it? That is true. Was not even thinking that, but totally, the 100% is where your brain should go when I say that. What about that you would get from the doctor? Yeah?
Anything that you're using that was a diuretic, was pulling water out of your
Oh, it would, absolutely. So you guys are smarter than me. I think you're thinking what I'm
No, I
thinking.
was bicarbonate.
Oh, you were bicarbonate. How about when we go to altitude to deal with the
We're,
what's the drug we use? Oxygen? Nope. I mean,
no,
yes, that impacts it, but
doesn't it make us breathe
I'm
faster?
highly disappointed, Chandler.
Doesn't it make us breathe faster so that we?
It actually works as a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor.
Oh.
When we go to elevation.
You're talking about
that's why we
for
take
altitude sickness?
acetazolamide.
Yes.
Is it carbonic anhydrase?
I did know it.
Is that for treatment of altitude sickness?
Yes. Yep.
Acetazolamide.
Acetazolamide. Yes, it's a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, so it
Yeah.
stops this conversion back and forth, so we get less symptoms of altitude illness.
Okay.
And so do we stay more based or?
We try to, yes. All right, respiratory and renal systems are our physiological buffer systems. They act more slowly than our chemical ones, but they also have more capacity for us to buffer things off, right? So let's take a look at respiratory acidosis and alkalosis, right? So, PCO2, what does that mean? What does that stand for?
Partial pressure of
Partial pressure of
carbon dioxide.
CO2, right? Normally, we want that to be in a range between 35 to 45 millimeters of mercury. As my advisor used to say, mama's hugs. Right? Between 35 to 45 millimeters of mercury. If our PCO2 starts going above 45 millimeters of mercury, that is an indication of respiratory acidosis. It's the most common cause. This really is the most common cause of our disturbances in pH, okay? It's due to a decrease in our ventilation or in gas exchange, right? Characterized by a falling blood pH and a rising PCO2. So remember, there is an inverse relationship between level of hydrogen ions and pH. Whereas hydrogen ions go up, the pH number goes down, right? So as PCO2 is directly, it's the way we can measure hydrogen ions, right, within the system. Because we're not going to measure those like by taking arterial blood gases or anything like that in the back of the ambulance. So instead, we just look at end tidal CO2 when we are respirating. All right? So as our PCO2 goes up, that means that our pH is going down and becoming more acidotic. Just like helping us get those terms together.
And that's when our field guide talked about emphysema, where it's like the gas exchange issue.
Yes.
You're not really going to have the same surface area.
Absolutely. So you don't have as good of the gas exchange because of the damage, because of the surface area being destroyed. Absolutely. All right, if our PCO2 is under 35, we are in respiratory alkalosis, right? Which means that we are getting our pH to a higher number or more basic, more alkalotic. It's often a result of hyperventilation, sometimes due to stress, pain. There can be other conditions as well. But if we got hyperventilation, we're blowing off a lot of PCO2. It's not accumulating within the system. We don't have a lot of hydrogen ions, and we start to become more alkalotic. So that's our respiratory acidosis and alkalosis. Then we have our metabolic acidosis and alkalosis, right? Metabolic just means anything that doesn't have to do with PCO2. It's like, if it's changing our pH and it doesn't have to do with respirations or our carbon dioxide levels, it's metabolic, right? And we can also see it come through in abnormal bicarbonate levels. So what causes metabolic acidosis? Too much alcohol, because alcohol gets converted into acetic acid within the system. So we can see it there. If we get an excessive loss of bicarbonate, like if we've got a lot of diarrhea happening. Accumulation of lactic acid, shock, ketosis, when we're diabetic, starvation, kidney failure, all these things are going to build up more hydrogen ions within the system, and that's going to lead to acidosis, and it's not from respirations, so it's metabolic.
What's the deal with all these keto diets and everybody trying to get into ketosis?
Yeah.
That's the patriarchy screwing you over.
Preach! You want to know my personal take on ketosis
Yes.
and
Yes.
ketogenic diets? They are very good for very specific people. So for instance, it successfully helps with uncontrollable epilepsy. It's really good at dealing with brain disorders. It really helps in Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, MS, other types of brain disorders. It has been shown to decrease cardiovascular risk and diabetic risk.
Even though
So does
ketosis
eating healthy
in the
actually.
diabetic crisis is potentially
I know.
bad.
Yeah, but if you're diabetic,
I think that
if you're not,
the treating of cardiovascular disease and diabetes, it is just as equally good to eat like a Mediterranean diet or just eat any diet that you're actually watching what you eat that is healthy. So I don't think it necessarily outweighs it. I do think for like epilepsy and Parkinson's and brain disorders, what we've noticed is that the intake of fats is needed to help repair the myelin. That's being destroyed, and you need those extra fats to be able to do that, and the only way you get that is really by being in a ketosis state. I think other than that, can it help you lose weight? Yes, absolutely it can. Can it help you lose it fast? Yes, absolutely it can. But as soon as you stop, all of that weight comes back immediately. And if you like, this is not what I was supposed to teach on today.
Thanks.
So if you are like, weight loss, no, let's do it this way. I'm gonna reverse these. This is time and how much weight loss there is. If you start on ketosis, on a ketogenic diet, you will lose weight more quickly and then it will plateau off after you've lost weight. If you go with just like your standard, diet, like recommended by the American Heart Association or Mediterranean diet or any of those other ones that you're just eating healthy, eating more whole grains, lean meats, anything like that, you will lose weight more slowly, but you will reach the same plateau. And if you go off either of these diets, this does not dip down as much as this does on your regaining of weight. Does that make sense?
Why is that the case?
Because these are slow habits built up over time and you lose weight more slowly. Whenever you lose weight more slowly, you also gain it back more slowly if you change those behaviors. Right? The body just goes back to what it's used to again and you just gain everything right away. Right? So like, if I do it slowly, it'll lose it more slowly if I start to regain some of my bad habits. If I lost my weight really quickly and then I go back to my normal habits and not eat a ketogenic diet, I can't even switch back to a normal diet. I have to like stay on the ketogenic diet the whole entire time. If I don't, I'm gonna drop down and I'm gonna regain all of that weight really quickly.
What if you stayed on the ketonic diet for like a really
Forever?
long time? Or like a really long time and then you switched off of it?
As soon as you switch off, you're gonna gain weight back again.
Even after years?
The research is still new, so the only times that it's actually been studied is like after stopping, after like 1 to 2 years. We just haven't had ketonic diets and studies much longer than that yet, but the data will still be coming out. The point in which they match the weight loss, as far as when they both are around the same part, is around 3 to 6 months. So it's like if you want to keep your weight off for longer, eat a healthier diet instead of a ketogenic diet, you'll still get there. It'll take you longer to get there, but you'll be able to maintain it for a longer period of time. Plus, it's easier to maintain a healthy diet.
So when
as
beach
opposed to
season
it.
is coming up, we want to know that.
What was that?
So, but when you talk about the weight gain, like getting it back, like if you start at 250 pounds and you go do this and you lose 40 pounds, you're not gonna gain 40 pounds back like immediately.
You can. I mean, not like immediately, but however, like they usually say however long it took you to lose it, often that's how long it takes for you to gain it back if you start to go back.
But you're talking about somebody who goes off of that, goes on to like really bad habits, going back to bad habits, because
So
As
you're
soon as
like,
you start eating carbs again, that's the hard part, is that it's not even like you have to eat a really crappy diet, you just start eating carbs again.
body's used to metabolizing differently.
Yep.
I was kind of on it, but I do eat carbs. I just don't eat a ton of carbs anymore.
Yeah, keeping them below a certain amount.
Not really, well, not even that, it's just going like avoiding bread and everything.
Yeah,
So I have bread, I just don't eat it every day.
it's purposeful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like potatoes, people have them, so I will eat potatoes, just not every day.
Yeah.
So it's probably closer to a diet.
Yeah, it's a bit like if you're like pouring fat into you, like
I
a
don't,
ketogenic diet, they like you up your fat intake a
I
lot.
don't really.
So it's like you're using like coconut oil at every meal and avocados and MCT oil and all of it, like you're like adding in lots of fats to it. Sounds like you're just eating like a more healthy diet.
What is MCT oil?
MCT oil?
It is a derivative of coconut oil. It either comes from coconut oil or it gets created in a coconut. I can't remember. Medium short chain, I think, fatty acid.
Sorry to keep you up there.
No, it's okay. It's good. All right. Yeah.
I have an acidosis question.
Yes,
So,
he's on track.
Bring it back. Thanks, teacher.
this might be the only time.
Was in there, okay.
So, metabolic acidosis in shock. So you would see that over going over 45 for your end tidal number. Is that what you're saying?
This instead will be playing with your bicarbonate.
Okay. Because I guess I was thinking about the last slide and the respiratory acidosis, and your partial pressure of CO2 is over 45, right? And then
That's what's causing it.
okay, because then I was like thinking of like the shock or the sepsis protocol, and your end tidal, if you're looking for something that's equal to or less than 25, so it was on the lower end. I was trying to make the two match.
Yes, so in respiratory acidosis, you are going into acidosis because of the high PCO2.
Okay.
In metabolic, it's not about the PCO2, it's about the bicarbonate levels, and bicarbonate levels are now dropping
I
because
see.
of a variety of reasons.
Yes.
Now, what we're gonna go into next is the compensation that happens from the other system.
So, like, you would be in decompensated shock if you weren't blowing off that CO2? Okay.
Is there another question?
I was actually gonna ask a question about the compensation, because like with the metabolic acidosis, wouldn't you notice that they would be in respiratory alkalosis? Like they would be.
It's not the same. So you're really looking at your values. So respiratory acidosis or alkalosis comes from the PCO2.
Mhm.
Metabolic comes from the bicarb. Now we will try to buffer that off by engaging the other system more. We'll get there in just a moment. But sometimes those numbers change and sometimes they don't. It just depends on how much we're compensating, if we're compensating at all. So with metabolic alkalosis, much less common, indicated by rising pH and bicarbonate. Vomiting is one of the biggest ones that we can see it in, as far as, you know, like in the field, vomiting can do it. Or like overdosing on antacids. So if they're like overdosing on Tums
Like a
or something like
super
that,
suicide.
that might cause it as well. But vomiting really is probably the only way we tend to see it.
Are there intentional overdoses on Tums, or is that just like?
I think it's more just like if I'm really feeling crappy and I just start, like I take much more, when my stomach's upset, I take much more than they're recommended, right? Like, I'm sorry, 2 Tums is not gonna cut it for if I'm having a lot of stomach acid going on. So, that is totally me, I eat chili hot dogs all the time, just kidding.
Maybe you already addressed it, but the reason that vomiting would cause that is because of the elimination of water from your system.
Elimination of the bile as well. Because think about how acidic our stomach contents are. We're not going through the digestion process. Instead, all that bile is coming up when we're vomiting, so it's getting rid of a lot of acid.
So,
And water.
so is that common to see for treating like bulimic people?
Oh. I have not seen statistics, but that would sure make sense to me. That would sure make sense to me. So if there's an imbalance due to one of these systems, the other one will compensate for it. So the respiratory system tries to correct for any of the metabolic acid-base imbalances, and the kidneys try to correct for any of the respiratory acid-base imbalances. So they try to make up for one another because our whole goal is to stay in homeostasis, to stay in equilibrium. So the body works to try and do that. So respiratory compensation. If we're having metabolic acidosis, high hydrogen levels stimulate the respiratory center. So then we're going to increase the rate and the depth of our breathing because we're sensing those hydrogen ions in our central chemoreceptors, which is our primary way in which we breathe. So blood pH is below 7.35 and bicarb level is low. As CO2 is eliminated by blowing it off, the PCO2 starts to fall below normal. So what we do is we start looking at the numbers. First we look at pH, and we determine, is it acidotic or is it alkalotic? Then we determine which of our values are the ones that we need to be paying attention to know whether it's metabolic or if it's respiratory. Then we take a look and see if there's compensation happening by the changing of the other system. We're going to go through a process of that in just a moment to help figure it out. It actually is a lot easier than it sounds. All right? Okay, that's just showing us our equation again, in case you forgot it. All right, respiratory compensation for metabolic alkalosis, slow, shallow breathing, allowing the CO2 accumulation in the blood. So I breathe slower, I can have more accumulation of CO2 building up because I'm retaining it for longer since I'm not breathing so quickly. The high pH over a 7.45 and elevated bicarbonate levels, right? So that's how we can tell. So we're going to change the CO2 in response to the bicarbonate levels and the pH level. And this is just like a fun little diagram. Right? So if we start blowing off too much CO2, we become alkalotic. If there's too little CO2, we become acidotic, right? So looking at our renal compensations then, respiratory acidosis, hypoventilation is causing that elevated PCO2. Renal compensation, we can see if our bicarbonate levels start to get high. So we'll look at to see what our bicarbonate levels are to see if we're compensating or not. Respiratory alkalosis has our low PCO2 and a high pH. And then if we're looking and we find that there is a drop in our bicarbonate levels, we can see that the renal system is compensating. Couple notes about compensation. Respiratory compensation, really quick. We can change our breathing instantaneously, right? Metabolic compensation is a little bit slower. It takes our kidneys longer to respond. Compensation is rarely complete. You will never really experience complete compensation, and you will definitely never overcompensate. Usually it's a combination of no compensation or partial compensation. Sound good? Okay, so here's the key to it all.
Simple.
Why is it an arterial blood sample? Why not a venous blood sample?
Because that's where you're going to see the pH more accurate for what's going into all of our cells than is affecting all of our cells as opposed to what's coming out of it. So you take a look at an arterial blood sample, or get the numbers reported from an arterial blood sample, right? And you're looking at the pH as our first thing. Is it less than 7.4? Is it more than 7.4? Let's say it's less than 7.4. That means we are in acidosis, right? So now the question becomes, is it metabolic or is it respiratory? And what we can do is look for our values. If our bicarbonate is greater than 24 milliequivalents per liter, we're in metabolic acidosis. If it's our PCO2 number that's large and it's above 40 millimeters of mercury, we are in respiratory acidosis.
Isn't it if our bicarb is less than?
Less than, did I say something different?
Yeah.
My bad.
Okay.
Less than, thank you. That's why I don't like you recording, because I misspeak all the time.
So, Mark.
All right, but now the question is, are they compensating? So then we go to the next one. If there's respiratory compensation for our metabolic acidosis, we will see a PCO2 of less than 40 millimeters of mercury. If we went down the road of acidosis and it was respiratory acidosis, to find out if there's renal compensation happening, we're going to look at the bicarbonate, and if it's greater than 24 milliequivalents per liter, then we're going to know that we are compensating renally for our respiratory acidosis. Does that make sense? Let's just talk through it verbally on the other side as well, and then we'll get a chance to practice them. So if our pH was greater than 7.4, we know we are in alkalosis, right? We are more basic. So now we've got to determine, is it metabolic or is it respiratory? So we look at our levels of of bicarbonate and our partial pressure of carbon dioxide. If our bicarbonate is greater than 24 milliequivalents per liter, we know that it's metabolic alkalosis. Then we can find out, are we compensating by looking at our PCO2 and is it greater than 40 millimeters of mercury? If in our alkalotic state, we are noticing that our PCO2 is less than 40 millimeters of mercury, we know that we're in respiratory alkalosis. To find out if we're compensating, we're going to take a look at our bicarb level, and if it's less than 24, then we know that we are compensating renally for our respiratory alkalosis. Mark.
Our normal range is 35 to 45 for CO2, but that threw me off. But I guess if we are not in alkalosis and our range is 35, then that's our baseline, or we're within normal
It's normal,
limits.
it hasn't changed.
Okay, but if our pH is high, then we look at below 40.
Yep.
Got it.
Is it 40 because these ones would be complete if they're 45 or 35? They would be complete compensation, but that is less than?
It's more of that it's stretching the ranges. Instead of staying what it was normally, it's stretching the ranges, showing that we are trying to do something to compensate. Does that make sense? All right. So I would learn this chart because it makes it so much easier than anything else, just to understand this. So what I've got for you, and you guys did one of these, right? For the homework, was it the emphysema patient, right? Okay, so that was case study number 1 on here. So see if you can do it again without looking at your field guide this time. I realize you might just remember the answer, but try to see if you can do it again. And then there are more for you to continue to do. So try it on your own first, and then you can turn to your colleagues and be like, hey, what did you get for this one? And see if you guys are on the same page. But give it your own shot first. And I will leave this graph up, or this chart up. If you guys want it in bigger, you can use it right now if you want.
Oh my God. So many cases. Oh my God.
Do you have another one? Or are these for sharing? What's that?
Corey made the copies.
Oh, we have a few copies.
Oh, there you go. I was like, he made the copies. I don't know.
With respiratory.
Right. Okay, so for patient or case study number 1, what did you guys come up with?
Compensated respiratory acidosis.
I like it. So we've got a low pH, a high PCO2, and a high bicarbonate if they're compensating. So we've got respiratory acidosis with renal compensation. Awesome.
So it would be fully compensated?
Not fully, because it would need to have the pH go back to 7.4.
Okay.
Now you might make the argument of like, we're on the outstretches of our normal range, so it's like getting close to compensation, but we're not at 7.4.
So would we adjust these on partial compensation, or just it's trying to compensate?
You can just say partial compensation. It's compensating, it's just not all the way.
Just when we name this compensated respiratory acidosis, do we say partial compensated respiratory acidosis, or do we just say compensated respiratory acidosis? Like, Is that trying to move it in that direction?
You
Or,
say partial.
Partial.
Because if you say just compensation, it would ensue that it's complete.
okay,
Yeah. Does that make sense?
yeah, so it's not back to normal.
Correct.
Yeah, just, I guess that would be our number 5,
I don't know.
which was, yeah, okay.
All right, case study. Oh, you got a question?
Yeah, so it's the complete versus partial, does that have to do whether the pH is within normal?
Yes. It's
So-
whether the pH is 7.4.
It's at 7.4?
At 7.4.
Because I was only thinking about that because during the field guide, I was like, oh, it's between 7.35 or 7.4, so I said complete because it falls in that range.
I think, like,
I didn't, like,
if you told that to somebody, I don't think they'd be like, oh, no, that's not good. You know what I mean?
I noticed like that.
Yeah. All right, number 2. What are you thinking? Awesome, metabolic alkalosis, because we had a high pH, we had a high bicarbonate, and we also had a high PCO2, which means we are partially compensating. Awesome.
40 is considered high.
Number 2, sorry, number 2 was?
It's smack down, so that's like.
Partially
Yeah.
metabolic
I
alkalosis.
actually was going.
Partially
it could be
compensated.
either Respiratory acidosis or respiratory alkalosis.
Or that-
It's smack dab in the middle.
But because CO2 is not moving, then it's not compensating yet.
Yeah, same. I just said no.
Yeah, that's what we had said.
I'm fine with that.
uncompensated.
That's good.
I still don't know what I'm talking about,
No, I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
So that's uncompensated metabolic acidosis,
Ask
alkalosis.
questions. I will try not to have it be exactly 40.
Thank you.
All right, case number 3.
Compensated metabolic acidosis.
Nice, metabolic acidosis, right? With a respiratory compensation. Well, is that 'cause- yeah,
So,
PCO2 is 34. All right, I for some reason don't have
so that's
slides
a
for the next three, but let's go over
partial
them.
compensated?
Yeah, partial compensation. All right, so case number 4. Good, we got respiratory alkalosis, partial renal compensation. All right, how about number 5?
Respiratory alkalosis with no compensation.
So respiratory alkalosis,
But it's compensated because
it's
it's
compensated,
point,
and it's almost complete compensation,
Yeah.
right? Like a 7.42 is pretty darn close to 7.4.
right, everything seems to be within normal-ish range.
So what did you call that? Respiratory alkalosis, or would you call it compensated respiratory alkalosis?
I'd say.
Compensated respiratory alkalosis, because the compensated got us back to within normal limits. Everything, all those ranges are within normal limits?
Well,
So anytime
yeah, I mean, you could almost argue maybe
and something else is off.
Normal-ish?
these are all normal.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with them.
So would you
Maybe
say
there's
that they're
no
just
not.
fully
That's what I was
compensated?
saying.
They're
There's no compensated
compensating
needed.
well for his heart attack, right? So you know what I'm talking about?
But, so then would it be he's compensated to get him back into those normal limits? Because everything's
You know,
within
honestly,
normal.
I would probably say that there's no compromise.
No compromise.
No compensation needed.
There's no compensation needed. The values are all so within range.
If we had more information and possibly like respirations, then we could make some calls about whether it's.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
Oh.
All right, number 6.
Metabolic acidosis.
Metabolic acidosis. And do we
Partial
have some
compensated?
compensation?
Yes.
Do have some compensation. Awesome. Questions?
So it was like, because you said you're gonna do test questions on this,
Yes.
so like you said, it's mostly partial. If not, if it has to be exactly at 7.4.
Yes.
To make it compensated.
I know it.
Yeah.
I just thought it was in the normal.
What's the application of this information when we're in the field? Is that gonna change how the, you know what I mean?
Yes. Hold
Yeah, but
on.
you only get, yeah. So do you like breathe for them more or less and that's how you know, or like what is?
We give bicarbonate when needed, and I
How do you know they're
Ledge.
acid?
What was that?
How are you gonna know to get bicarb?
When you're looking at their levels.
We can look at their partial pressure of CO2.
You can look at the partial pressure of CO2.
That's different though.
It is, it's true, because then we don't know, is that CO2 because they're compensating, or like we don't know where it's at. We're gonna have to look for history to know what's happening.
Or if the paramedic like in the ER.
Or exactly, if you can actually get blood samples and have them run, that you have this information. Some ambulances in like Austin County, Texas, like in Travis County, like there's some that actually can be running blood tests to know what it is in the back of the ambulance. Not in Eugene, not even in Portland, probably not even in Seattle, but in some of like the really large areas, they can actually do that and be running them in the back so they can actually get the report to know what's needed at that particular time.
Doesn't running like a serum lactate also indicate some sort of like acidosis versus alkalosis?
You could get what the hydrogen ions are. I don't know how that necessarily corresponds with numbers though, because I've never studied that to know for sure.
Because I think they're bringing that around.
Finger stick, whole lactic acid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do that.
So like understanding this is important for applying when you're gonna use bicarb versus not.
Yes.
Okay.
But only in the ER setting where you're getting the
When you get
Unless you're in
CO2.
cardiac arrest, then you're gonna push